everyone, and welcome. My name is Becca Choate, and I serve as Associate for Global Advocacy and Education with Global Ministries of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and the United Church of Christ. Welcome to Wednesdays with the World, a United Church of Christ webinar series. This series highlights the ways in which the quest for justice is intersectional and global, providing opportunities for increased awareness of global concerns and highlighting opportunities for advocacy and action. Today's webinar is called Resisting Apartheid, Promoting Justice and Planting Olive Trees. I'd now like to introduce my colleague, Peter McCary, who serves Global Ministries as the executive for the Middle East and Europe, who will introduce our speaker and moderate this conversation. Peter.
Thank you, Becca. Good day and welcome to all of you to this special Wednesdays with the World webinar. My name is Peter McCary, and I'm pleased to serve you as executive for the Middle East and Europe in Global Ministries of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and United Church of Christ. Global Ministries has already offered insight and perspectives on Israel-Palestine this week during our intensive 2022 second quarter advocacy focus, and we are eager to continue today and through the rest of the week. Glad that you're able to join us. I want to extend a special thanks to my colleagues in Global Ministries, Becca Choate and Krista Johnson-Weichsel, for all their hard work in developing the focus and preparing these sessions, and to Brandy Midget-Crosby for her technical support today. It is our hope that this webinar, as part of the special events Global Ministries is offering this week on Israel-Palestine, stimulates you to learn, pray, and engage the reality through the perspectives of Disciples and UCC partners and mission co-workers, and to sustain your efforts to seek justice and peace in Israel-Palestine and the Middle East. Today, we will take on the subject of apartheid as it relates to Israeli policies and practices toward the Palestinians, and to learn about ways that our partner, the Joint Advocacy Initiative of the East Jerusalem YMCA and the YWCA of Palestine, are calling attention to the realities on the ground and empowering their fellow Palestinians to resist the persistent and aggressive ways that Israel's military occupation attempts to deny people their rights, an abundant life, and a decent livelihood. We are especially pleased to welcome Mr. Nidal Abu Zuluf, the director of the Joint Advocacy Initiative, to speak with us today. As you may be aware, in the last year and a half, some significant and well-known organizations have issued reports naming Israeli policies and practices as apartheid. In January 2021, our UCC and Disciples partners, B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, issued a report called A Regime of Jewish Supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid. That was followed a month later by Human Rights Watch, which published its detailed and well-documented 220-page report entitled A Threshold Crossed: Israeli Authorities and the Crime of Apartheid and Persecution. In February of this year, Amnesty International issued its own report entitled Israel's Apartheid Against the Palestinians, a 280-page report that demonstrates how Israel systematically discriminates against Palestinians. These reports were welcomed by our partners in Israel-Palestine, including the Middle East Council of Churches, Department of Service for Palestinian Refugees, Kairos Palestine, and B'Tselem. In the US, a few churches have or will soon consider policy resolutions and public witness that names Israeli policies and practices as apartheid. The UCC was the first to adopt the apartheid framework in July 2021, when its General Synod passed a resolution entitled Declaration for a Just Peace Between Palestine and Israel that stated, "We affirm that all people living in Palestine and Israel are created in the image of God, and that this bestows ultimate dignity and sacredness to all. Therefore, we reject any laws and legal procedures which are used by one race or religion or political entity to enshrine one people in a privileged legal position at the expense of another, including Israel's apartheid system of laws and legal procedures." And the Disciples' leadership issued Compelled to Witness, a pastoral letter in late February of this year that said, in part, Israeli policies and practices that discriminate against Palestinians, Christians and Muslims alike, are consistent with the international legal definition of the crime of apartheid as defined in the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid, 1973, and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Our own church's positions are informed by the realities our partners convey to us. And so we must recognize that some of our own Palestinian Christian partner organizations have been using the term and framework of apartheid for much longer, spanning 2 decades, to describe the reality in which they live. Those include the YMCA, the YWCA, and the Joint Advocacy Initiative, especially in the context of its Keep Hope Alive initiative, which we will hear about today. Here to speak with us from Bethlehem is Mr. Nidal Abu Zuluf. Nidal is the director of the Joint YMCA YWCA Advocacy Initiative and a co-author of the Palestinian Kairos document, A Moment of Truth, which was issued in December of 2009. He serves as a member in its steering committee and in the executive committee of the Global Kairos for Justice Coalition. Kairos Palestine and Global Kairos for Justice issued its Cry for Hope in July 2020. Both documents, The Moment for Truth and The Cry for Hope, are seminal documents that the Disciples and UCC leadership encouraged members to read, study, and act upon. Nidal is also the founder of the Palestinian Youth Ecumenical Movement, which is a member of the World Student Christian Federation, and until recently, he served as the coordinator of the National Coalition of Christian Organizations in Palestine, the NCCOP. Nidal will offer an opening presentation, and then he'll take your questions. So please use the Q&A box in Zoom to submit your questions as they come to your mind. Nidal, we are delighted that you can be with us today and welcome you. Welcome and ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all at the UCC and the Disciples for organizing this very important webinar. I'm actually very much appreciative for giving me this opportunity. Actually, this comes in a very tense situation connected with the killing of the Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh and many others during the past weeks. And the way the Israeli police attacked the funeral and the participants of that funeral. And this was actually something unprecedented. I will be talking about apartheid and some manifestations of apartheid and some reports connected with apartheid. In addition to the ones you mentioned, Peter, there are others actually connected with some UN rapporteurs and UN commissions, and also some Israeli officials who talked about apartheid. And I will also talk about the Olive Tree Campaign as one of the means by which we resist this system of oppression. Back to the topic. In June 2002, the Israeli occupation authorities decided to build the wall. They called it a wall of Hafrada in Hebrew. Hafrada in Hebrew means segregation. They used this to separate the Palestinians from the Israelis for what they called a security reason. Since then, many groups and people started to talk about an Israeli system of apartheid in development. Building that wall was illegal according to the International Court of Justice, and it was built on the Palestinian land. The wall has already left many people disconnected from their land that became de facto annexed. The crime of apartheid is defined by the 2002 Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, as you mentioned, Peter, as inhuman acts of a character similar to other crimes against humanity committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and demonization of one social group or racial group, over any other racial group or groups, and committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. In reality, under Israeli law and in practice, Jewish Israelis and Palestinians are treated differently in almost every aspect of life, including freedom of movement, housing, education, employment, and other basic human rights and needs. Dozens of Israeli laws and policies institutionalize this prevailing system of racial discrimination and domination. Segregation is carried out by implementing separate legal regimes for Jewish Israelis and Palestinians living in the same area, Jewish Israeli living in settlements are governed by Israeli civil law, while Palestinians are governed by Israeli military law. Israel carries out various acts that are prohibited by the United Nations Apartheid Conventions, like forcible transfer of Palestinians to make way for illegal settlements and transferring its people to the occupied land, preventing Palestinians from returning to their homes and lands, seizing of lands in the Area C. I think you all know that we live in A, B, C areas according to Oslo Accords, and C area is fully controlled by the Israeli military occupation. And this causes forcible displacement of people. I think you maybe heard about the decision made just 10 days ago from the Israeli High Court, calling for the evacuation of something like 20 villages in Masafir Yatta, south of Hebron, where 4,000 Palestinians will be transferred from where they live, will be disconnected from the land, will be forcibly transferred from that, so as to build Israeli settlements and firing zones for the Israeli military. And this includes the systematic deprivation of fundamental human rights of the Palestinians based on their identity, like family reunions or revoking of residency rights. We can elaborate more on this, maybe while you raise questions. Denying the Palestinians the right to freedom of movement. And I'll give the example of Hebron, H2 area in Hebron, which is fully controlled by Israel, where there are 500 settlers guarded by more than 2,000 Israelis. And this area is surrounded by more than 110 checkpoints, making life hell for the Palestinians. And this also includes murder, torture, unlawful or illegal, I would say, imprisonment and persecution of Palestinians almost on a daily basis, house demolishing, collective punishment, blah, blah, blah. It will be good here to mention some reports and mentioning of Israel apartheid. Russell Tribunal on Palestine, held in South Africa in 2011, found that the Palestinians living under colonial military rule in the occupied Palestinian territory, as well as in the Palestinian cities of Israel, are subject to a regime of apartheid due to a systematic, widespread, and institutionalized inhuman act by the Israeli authorities. The United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination criticized Israel in 2012 for implementing two entirely separate legal systems and sets of institutions. John Dugard, South African law professor and United Nations Special Rapporteur, wrote a detailed study in 2013 on whether the charge of apartheid applies to Israel. Very big question. And this question was built on Richard Falk, his successor, United Nations Special Rapporteur, wrote in 2014 that Israel is guilty of racial discrimination, apartheid, and torture in a systematic oppression of the Palestinian people. Also in 2017, in March, the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, ESCWA, commissioned and published a report called Israel Practices Toward the Palestinian People and the Question of Apartheid. Again, in 2019, the current United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied territories, Michael Link, stated that formal annexation of part of the West Bank will only confirm a one-state reality characterized by a rigid two-tier system of legal and political rights based on ethnicity and religion. This would meet the international definition of apartheid. Also in 2020, 47 human rights experts signed, United Nations human rights experts signed a statement saying that Israel has recently promised to maintain permanent security control between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. Thus, the morning after annexation would be a crystallization of an already unjust reality. Two people living in the same space, ruled by the same state, but with profoundly unequal rights. This is a vision of a 21st century apartheid. Another very important report, Peter and friends, written by Yesh Din, which is another Israeli human rights organization, they talked about this in September 2020, said that the continued creeping legal annexation, let alone official annexation of a particular part of the West Bank through legalization that would apply Israeli law and administration there, is an amalgamization of the regimes. This could mean strengthening the argument which already is being heard, that the crime of apartheid is not committed only in the West Bank, that Israel regime is in its entirety an apartheid regime, and that Israel is an apartheid state. And then I'll skip talking about B'Tselem, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty, because you just talked about that, Peter. We at Kairos Palestine called Israel an apartheid state in a statement made in 2015. The NCCOP, the National Coalition of Christian Organizations, did so in its open letter to the World Council of Churches and the Ecumenical Movement in June 2017. The Global Kairos for Justice Coalition reaffirmed this in its Cry for Hope document issued in July 2020, asking the Ecumenical Movement to recognize Israel as an apartheid state. Of course, you mentioned the resolution or the declaration for the just peace between Israel and Israel resolution or declaration made by the UCC Synod in July 2021. I would here mention also some of the Israeli governmental officials who mentioned something about apartheid. Rovin Rivlin, which is the president of Israel until 2021, was quoted in an Israeli press on the 12th of February 2017, saying that Israel, in newly passed regularization law, which formally expropriate several tracts of Palestinian land, will cause Israel to be seen as an apartheid state. One of the first people to use the word apartheid in relation to Israel was the first Israeli Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion. Following the war of 1967, he warned that Israel is becoming an apartheid state if it retained control of the occupied territories, which it has already done. In 1999, the Israeli former Prime Minister Ehud Barak stated that even attempts to keep hold of, every attempt to keep hold of Israel and the occupied territories as one political entity leads necessarily to either a non-democratic or a non-Jewish state. Because if the Palestinians vote, then it is a binational state. And if they do not vote, then it's an apartheid state. Again, another Israeli official who was actually the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and who served as an Israeli ambassador to South Africa until 1994, said in 2013 that the occupation of the West Bank as it exists today is a sort of an Israeli apartheid. I mean, these are Israeli actually officials. In 1976, actually, the late Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, actually, who was assassinated by a Jew following Oslo Accords, saying that Israel continued to presence in the West Bank risked becoming apartheid. I mean, these are all actually Israeli officials. These are part of what they've said. And of course, what I also added to what Peter said are some very important facts and reports and talks made by some key human rights activists worldwide on the system of oppression and apartheid. Let me now elaborate on the Israeli policies and practices that are part of this apartheid system. I'll do this in connection with the Olive Tree campaign. Let's move now to the other part of my presentation as one of the responses to this system of oppression and apartheid. Since the beginning of the Israeli occupation and colonization of the West Bank and Gaza in 1967, Israel has been using a series of military orders to control the Palestinian people and land. They used laws from the Turkish rule before even 1917. And also they used the emergency laws imposed by the British Mandate on Palestine in 1945. But they also developed their own military orders whenever they needed to achieve the purpose of full control of people and land. In the occupied Palestinian territories, one can say that every single issue is controlled by a military order including the basic services and needs of human beings. Throughout the years, and here I'll talk about the olive tree. Throughout the years of occupation, hundreds of thousands of olive trees have been systematically targeted by Israel. Since the year 2002, when they started to build the segregation wall, or what we call it now, Apartheid wall, more than 800,000 olive trees have been uprooted and destroyed by Israel. The purpose of this was to build the Apartheid wall, to build more settlements and bypass roads, linking settlements together and settlements to Israel. And this led to forcibly displace many Palestinian families and seize more Palestinian land. The direct action of the Israeli military occupation against the very presence of the Palestinian farmers are added to several procedures taken by the Israeli military administration. They call it civil administration, actually. Such policy prevents the Palestinian farmers from building shelters on their private land, or digging water systems to collect rainwater for agricultural purposes, or from opening roads to the farmlands unless they get permits by the Israeli military, and such permits are impossible to obtain. Also, Israel continues its policies of reappropriating the land in the occupied Palestinian territories, which practically means confiscating more Palestinian private property for security reasons, or for military use, or for agricultural purposes, for their nature departments, blah, blah, blah. Later, the land is usually moved to be used by the Israeli settlers to build more settlement units. These Israeli measures mainly happens in what's so-called Area C, as I mentioned, as classified by Oslo Accords. This area makes some 62% of the land in the occupied territories. Area C is under the full Israeli security and civil control. In this area, there are severe violations of international law and mainly international humanitarian law connected with the issue of the land that can be easily observed. Let me mention some of the facts about how Israel deals with Area C. In 99% of the cases, the Palestinians cannot have building permits for any structure in their own private land. So living in these areas for Palestinians is quite difficult, and looks impossible. There is no access to water or power or any of the other basic services in the Area C. Building water wells, for instance, and even collecting rainwater in a concrete structure, for whatever reason, is prohibited. Any of such constructions are considered illegal by the Israeli military authorities and will be necessarily demolished. It's impossible to build agricultural roads or rehabilitate existing ones. So reaching to the land for cultivation is very difficult and expensive. The land close to Israeli colonies or settlements and its owners are regularly attacked by Israeli settlers during the agricultural activities. So it's usually dangerous to do planting or harvesting in these areas because of these conditions, attacks, and difficulties. The number of Palestinians living in Area C is decreasing by time, unfortunately. As one can analyze, the purpose of such policy and measures is to get the Palestinian people disconnected from their land. So Israel can say that the land is not being used or cultivated, and then they take it to build or expand settlements or build bypass roads for settlers or use it for military purposes or declare it as a natural reserve, etc. This is already found in the military orders they use. As I said, as I mentioned, that they have military orders on how they can keep the full control over people and land. They make it very hard for the Palestinian farmers to cultivate the land and then easily confiscate it in a clear violation of international law. They aim to control most of the land for their own colonial purposes, step by step, consequently leading to forcible displacement of the more Palestinian people from Area C. This reality makes the Palestinian farmers in need of all kinds of possible support in order to be able to face this continuous Israeli attempts to steal their land and the ongoing intimidation measures or intimidating measures and attacks committed by the Israeli fanatic settlers and soldiers. And here comes our response. In 2002, actually, the Joint Advocacy Initiative launched the Olive Tree Campaign. The purpose of the campaign was to protect the Palestinian land, promoting the international solidarity with the Palestinian people, and to put an end to the Israeli violation of human rights of the Palestinian farmers to access and maintain their land. The GI also, or the Joint Advocacy Initiative, also aimed at enhancing the Palestinian steadfastness and non-violent resistance against this system of dominance and apartheid. How much time do I still have?
We have about a half hour left in the webinar, but continue your presentation for a few more minutes.
Can I have only 5 minutes?
Sure, yes.
Okay, the Olive Tree Campaign serves as a solidarity tool with the Palestinian farmers and the Palestinian people at large. Sponsoring olive trees was always seen as a good, tangible tool to show solidarity and support with people. You can't imagine what it means for a farmer to have trees sponsored by internationals. This is so empowering and enhances the commitment of the farmers to fight for their own land. It also serves as a preventive tool, so as to save the land from confiscation, since cultivating the targeted land in Area C, as said, makes it more protected against the Israeli land policy and military orders in use. It also serves as a protective tool, especially when internationals take part in the planting and harvesting activities that we and other Palestinian groups organize on a yearly basis. I mean, this year we received 6 international delegations who took part in planting olive trees in Palestine from February until the end of March. This is amazing. I mean, you see how those people come from every single country in the world so as to show solidarity and physical presence with the Palestinian people and Palestinian farmers in particular. The Olive Tree Campaigns also serves as a lobbying and advocacy tool, since it gives the sponsors a tool to address the issue of human rights violations committed against the farmers and the need to respect the rights of the farmers to access and use their land. Above all, the OTC serves as a tool to contribute to ending the Israeli colonial settler system of apartheid. Sponsors and partner organizations do lobby the policymakers, seeking the respect of the international law and the need to hold Israel accountable to its obligations under international law. Through partnering with some 35 international organizations, JI succeeded to plant more than 240,000 olive trees, sponsored by more than 90,000 people and entities worldwide since the launch of this campaign in 2002. All those people have learned about the Palestinian question and mainly about the difficulties the farmers face. They developed an attitude that respects and supports and defends, actually, the rights of the Palestinian farmers to access and use their land. They also took concrete actions of sponsoring olive trees and get engaged in the Palestinian struggle for justice. Many did visit Palestine and learned more about the context, helped in planting olive trees and picking olives. Many addressed the Palestinian questions to their policymakers in their respective countries, asking for accountability and for the end of the Israeli impunity. I'm concluding here. The Olive Tree Campaign helped the farmers get more connected to the land and overcome the difficulties caused by the Israeli measures. In the past 20 years, the campaign served more than 22,000 Palestinians and helped protecting 99% of the benefited lands from being confiscated. This is amazing. The lands are now more accessible and more attainable by the owners, full of trees and green all the year long, give fruit and contribute to enhancing the living conditions of farmers. Farmers are more empowered and enjoy much solidarity. They are more resilient and have hope for a better future. They are more committed to fight for freedom and just peace. As said, the campaign helps to respond to this system of apartheid by promoting the international solidarity movement with the Palestinian people and enhancing the engagement of thousands of people and entities to advocate for an end of the system of oppression and promote freedom and just peace for the Palestinians. We believe the campaign has contributed to make this a bigger possibility. The Israeli authorities destroy olive trees as a tool of control and dominance, and we plant olive trees as a tool of resistance to the system of oppression. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nidal. That's a broad and very helpful presentation on the realities of apartheid, the many voices around the world and from Palestine that have named the reality as apartheid, and also for sharing the inspiring program that the Joint Advocacy Initiative has undertaken for these 20 years. Global Ministries of the UCC and Disciples is a proud partner of the Joint Advocacy Initiative, and Becca has put in the chat a link so that our audience can see how to participate and perhaps sponsor a tree and support a farmer in that way. I wonder, we do have a few questions already coming in, but remind the audience that if you do have questions, to please put those in the question and answer box. I just wanted to start though, if you could share something about the meaning of the olive tree for Palestinians. It has rich meaning and also is a source of livelihood for Palestinian people. So it has that practical side as well. And maybe just share something about how many farmers the Joint Advocacy Initiative is working with currently.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, this year, actually, we've succeeded to plant the biggest number of olive trees, which was 47,000. This is amazing. And those trees were sponsored by something like 33,000 people worldwide. I mean, this year we dealt with 660 actually farmers. I mean, I would say farms, or I would say pieces of land. And when I say land, I mean, or farms, I'm talking about the entire family who's benefiting from this. The average family size in Palestine is something like 5.5. So if we can talk about 3,000 or 4,000 people benefited this year, only this year, from the olive tree campaign. As mentioned, we have already served something like 22,000 Palestinians since the beginning of this campaign. The olive tree is very, very beautiful tree. I mean, the olive tree, first of all, it's a holy tree. I mean, and it's a tree that people are proud of planting and having, because it gives living all the years long, and it survives and lives longer than any other tree in Palestine. I mean, we have trees in Palestine whose age is more than 5,000 years. This is amazing. And those trees, every year they give fruit. Imagine if you have a piece of land that where you have something like 100 or 200 olive trees. I mean, you can survive by this. I mean, this enhances your living conditions. Of course, the olive tree is also a tree that is a symbol of peace and prosperity. It's a tree that actually does not need that much care compared to others. And that's why actually we chose the olive tree, not any other tree, because the olive tree does not need much water. I mean, because water is very much scarce. Water is so much controlled by the state of Israel. I mean, in Bet Sahur, for instance, we were talking about this because Rifat, your friend, is now a member of the municipal council, and he said that what we get every day from the Israeli water authorities is something like 65 liters per day, and the normal number of liters that for human consumption, according to the World Health Organization, is 130 liters per day. So we have less water. This is for our consumption, and let alone, I mean, irrigation needs. I mean, the need to irrigate your trees, if you have trees, or if you have fruit trees that needs irrigation regularly. So, I mean, it doesn't work this way under such conditions. So olive tree was the answer, that you just leave it. You just plant it during the planting season, during the winter time, and just leave it. It will survive. It will manage to survive alone without that much care. So you need maybe to do the pruning every 5 years, not like any other tree that you need to do it for once every year. So, I mean, it's a symbol of prosperity. It's a symbol of peace. It's a symbol of justice. I mean, it's a symbol of giving. for people, and many people do rely on olive trees, and olive trees actually contribute to something like 14% of the Palestinian economy. Mm-hmm. And we have something like 10 million olive trees planted in the agricultural land in 50% of the Palestinian agricultural land. If you come to Palestine, I think you know that, Peter, because you did it many times. You can see that whenever you travel in these bypass roads, wherever, you can see olive trees everywhere around on either side. So people believe in olive trees, and as I said, for them it's a tree of giving, and it's a holy tree and a tree of peace.
Mm-hmm. And the opportunity to share in this program and to sponsor a tree is a way for people to connect very directly and personally with the land and with the people. So we're glad to partner with you on that. We have a few questions from our audience, and they are a variety of points. The first one is, does the goal of completely eliminating Israel by Hamas, Iran, and the Palestinian Constitution complicate Palestinian life? Now, I'm not asking you, and I'm sure the audience member is not asking you to speak on behalf of Hamas, Iran, or the Palestinian Constitution, but maybe you can just enlighten us a little bit and share what you hear about these perspectives. And the questioner continues: isn't this like advocating genocide against Israel? What would you? How would you respond to those questions?
I mean, all the Palestinian civil society initiatives that targets apartheid and the system of oppression are based on the international law. Even the BDS movement is based on the international law. When they talk about justice, equality, and freedom, they talk about international law. We call for the respect and the implementation and the enforcement. In our case, we need enforcement of the international law on our question, on our context. And we have never talked about something like, destroying the state of Israel or kicking the people, because we say that in Kairos, and this was made clear, that we want to liberate our enemy from being oppressors. So we want also to help our enemy to get rid of their sins and to repent. Hamas said clearly many times that they will say okay to a two-state solution. They will say they might not recognize Israel because this is something religious for them, but they can survive with Israel on a two-state solution. Forget about Iran. We are not driven by Iran. Iran is not dictating us what to do and what not to do. We are here living in a very bad, serious condition, and I think the only solution for this is ending the impunity of Israel, holding Israel accountable to its obligations, and also the entire world community, because we believe that many countries are still complicit, directly or indirectly, in our oppression. We need to end this, and we need to exercise our rights that are articulated in the international law, in the many UN resolutions. So this is the fundamental or the basis of the just peace that we are asking for. This includes the right to return, for sure. This includes all the Palestinian rights that should be respected by even the state of Israel, and where people need to enjoy equality. Because as we say in Christianity, that we are all created on the image of God, and we need to see the face of God or the image of God in every single human being. So we are not driven by what Iran says. And as I told you, even Hamas made it clear that they will accept a two-state solution. So they didn't talk about, but it has a lot to do with the practices of the state of Israel, sometimes here and there. But officially speaking, they said that many times.
In your answer, you talked about the complicity of countries around the world in perpetuating the oppression of Palestinian people. Certainly, the United States has a special relationship with Israel and sends billions of dollars of military aid to Israel on an annual basis. I wonder what message you would want to convey to a particularly American audience about ways that that we as people of faith can be engaged to change the ways that our policy, our country's policies, impact the Palestinian people.
I think we can clearly say that the USA is so much complicit in our oppression and our sufferings in occupation, as they unconditionally support the state of Israel. And not only this, I mean, there are many actually civil society groups or NGOs in the USA. I don't know what you call them. They call them charities in the UK, but they do support even settlement activities. I mean, they do support settlement groups or settler groups. And there is a campaign now called Defund Racism that is launched by a group, an American group called Good Shepherds Collective. My daughter is part of this actually group, and they are doing good work in New York, targeting the IRS system, targeting the companies or organizations who support the settlement or settlers groups in a violation of the American law itself, because I mean those shouldn't be to support political activities. For us, I think the American administration has always been complicit, and I think it's the time to lobby the American administration, the White House, and the Congress. I think we need to work hard with the Congress. There are good moves by some of the members of the Congress on issues related to the question of Palestine that I think we need to exert more so as to create not only a debate within the Congress, but a national debate, a federal, I would say, debate run by some active civil society groups in the USA about the Palestinian questions. And complicity is very, very clear in this respect. I mean, despite of the fact that they talk about peace, they talk about freedom, they talk about security, everybody talks about this, but everybody is complicit, unfortunately, when it comes to what's called the world community, I mean, which is mainly made of governments. Because, I mean, we have fed up with nice words, we need actions. If you believe that Israel is doing wrong, if you believe that the Israeli attack on that funeral is wrong, Mr. Secretary of the State, I think you need to take actions. It's not about just criticizing or feeling angry or outrageous. Or I mean, I think you need to take action. Otherwise, I mean, Israel will still enjoy that impunity that it has always enjoyed and made it go far with its violations of human rights without being punished.
Thank you. A question comes about organizations that promote solidarity between Palestinians and Israelis, and what roles do they play in promoting peace in Israel-Palestine? One example might be Combatants for Peace. Can you share something about perhaps what you have experienced or seen in terms of their work and effort?
I mean, we think that it's very important that those groups are there. They are very small groups, not that influential, unfortunately. But I mean, every single group of people who respects the rights of the Palestinian people to justice, freedom, and equality is respected. We still have a problem with Competence for Peace, actually. I mean, we do have a problem. We work more closely with the BDS from within, for instance. We work closely with the Women's Coalition for Peace in Israel. We work closely with also Zukhrot in Israel and the human rights organizations. But there are organizations who are still hesitant to respect the entire rights of the Palestinian people as articulated by the United Nations Security Council or General Assembly resolutions. So I think, I mean, all those, they do good work, but I think they need to go further with their courage to declare that we do respect the entire Palestinian rights, all the rights of the Palestinian people, including the right of return. Because, I mean, we have almost half of the Palestinian people are refugees living in very miserable conditions, and they have the right to return and to reparation. So this should be respected and should be protected and should be accepted by all the parties, including those who are promoting justice and peace and like competent for peace. And there are many actually groups who are there, but I think they need to be brave enough to say that we do respect the Palestinian right to self-determination and respect all the international law and the universal declarations in connections with the Palestinian question.
Another question comes in from an audience member, and this relates to solidarity from Palestine and beyond. What have you found to be most compelling for ordinary Black folk in the United States who are not active in left politics to actively embrace solidarity? Narratives, key points, activities, what kinds of things have you experienced as ways to connect with communities, including the African American community in the US, to engage together in the common struggle against oppression?
Yeah, yes. I think I must admit that we didn't work much on this until now. I mean, despite of that there are attempts by the Palestinian people to be connected with the global struggles of indigenous people and minorities, blah, blah. We were so much in support of Black Lives Matter. We were so much in support of the Dalit in India. We were so much support of the struggle of the people of Sri Lanka and Myanmar and in the people of actually Korea, calling for the reunification of the peninsula. But I think because of our context, because of being so much engaged in daily basis in our own struggle, I think this made us maybe not investing much in this. But I mean, we are considering this. I think if you see our general secretary, he's always dressing this T-shirt of Black Lives Matter, which is amazing. Of course, I mean, we believe, based on this global analysis made by, I don't know if you know, Peter, this Kim Yong-bok, Professor Kim Yong-bok from South Korea, who passed away just a month ago, about the concept of empire. We need to resist empire. And empire is made of this global military, financial, even theological, Christian, whatever, religious power that wants to dominate. And we need to resist this in every single part of the world. And so we need to join people's power so as to create a better world for all, even for our oppressors, because we want also to see the face of God in them, as we keep saying. So I think, yeah, we are in this track now, especially that we have already formed this Global Chaos for Justice Coalition, and through this we have learned more about struggles in different parts of the world. Actually, on the 20th, actually, in a 2-day time, we are giving a presentation about the Palestinian struggle in support of the struggle in Sri Lanka nowadays, that people and our partners, the ecumenical movement, is involving in or taking part in. So I think we need to exert more efforts on that. I mean, which is very, very much important. I fully agree.
Thank you. You've also mentioned the theological aspect, and one area that I know you've been active in, we're active in it together, is the effort to counter the impact of Christian Zionism. One member of our audience today asks, as a Christian, how do you relate to evangelical Christian denominations, including Christian Zionists, that support Israel?
Yeah, I mean, we have already said clearly that we ask those people who justify oppression, who justify injustices, who justify the practices of the state of Israel in our context, if we talk about Palestine, to repent, because this, according to the Kairos document, we consider this as a sin against God and humanity. We can't misuse the misinterpret the Bible to justify oppression, because the Bible is about good news, it's about justice, it's about peace, it's about love, it's about the kingdom of God, where all these beautiful things prevail. So we talk with those people, and we want to talk with those people. There are Palestinian groups who every other year make a conference mainly for evangelicals. This conference is called actually Christ at the Checkpoint. The coming conference will be on the 26th of this very month actually. So we are inviting evangelicals to come to learn, because when they come to learn and they see the reality, I think they will think in a different way. We target those people, and we believe that we have changed. We have created some change in these groups. We will keep asking and lobbying those people. We will keep targeting those groups so as to think differently, because justifying oppression is not about Christianity, it's about political agendas that some of the religious leaders are in a way or another involved in. And I hope our coming conference on Christian Zionism, Peter, will be a success in Latin America. But I mean, this is on the agenda of the Global Cars for Justice Coalition and the Cars Palestine movement. We need to keep targeting those people, because we believe that they contribute in a way to our oppression, or they are complicit in a way to the sufferings we are living under.
You're referring to a conference that is being planned.
In Chile,
to bring together Palestinians and members in the Latin America community to lift up the reality of Christian Zionism and to think together about how to counter it in that context. Another exciting way of solidarity across borders. Another question. Do you find hope in the rising number of Jewish people in the US and Canada who are speaking up for respect and support for Palestinians based on fundamental Jewish commitment to respect and caring for other people?
Of course. I mean, those are our partners. I mean, there are many great Jewish groups in the USA, in the UK, in many parts of the world. I mean, like Jewish Voice for Peace, Jews for Justice for the Palestinians, and another Voice of Jews in the USA, Naturi Karta. There are very good, I would say, the real Jewish groups who are, I mean, Judaism is based on justice. I mean, and those people know exactly what is the meaning of justice. And we have actually participated jointly in many conferences. I personally actually hosted once Eliza Weiss from Jewish Voice for Peace in one of the Caros Palestine conferences. We are working closely with those people, and hopefully we will also promote our engagement and partnership with them. They are our real partners, and they can show exactly what it means to be a real Jew in a context of oppression. So I think we need them, they need us, and we need maybe to develop and work more on how to get together to join forces, as you said in the film we started with. Together we are stronger and we can make a change. So everyone, whether he's a Jew, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, Hindus, whoever, working for justice is our ally. We need to come together to face this empire and create a better world for every single human being.
Just a couple more questions. One relates to the state of negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, asking, since a peace treaty has never been signed between Palestine and Israel, doesn't a state of war exist at this time? Maybe you can comment on the Oslo agreements of the early 90s, what has become of those, and the reality of continuing military occupation.
I mean, most of the Palestinian people think that Oslo agreements was like a kind of a trap for the Palestinian people. And there was no real intention that this ends with a real political settlement. Now the Palestinian people are living in less than 9% of historic Palestine, which was all ours before the creation of the State of Israel. It was supposed, according to Oslo, that the Palestinian people will live in an independent state by the year 1998. Now, as I told you, we are living in, I would say, something like the Bantustones and townships. You know, Peter, if you go to Beit Jala and look at Bethlehem area, the way people live, we are squeezed in a very small area. Most of the Palestinians in Bethlehem area are living in very small town or complex. They can't go further because further is Area C, which is fully controlled by settler regional councils or by the Israeli army. Oslo was like a trap. We think there was no intention that Oslo will be the basis for a permanent political settlement. Oslo was not based clearly on the respect of human rights and international law. What we are living under now is very bad political security situation. The Palestinian Authority is fully corrupt. The Palestinian Authority is powerless. They can do nothing. Many Palestinians believe that the Israeli Authority is dealt with as subcontractors for the Israelis. They do nothing, actually. Oslo is not anymore there. It's just on paper. So the Israelis are not only controlling Area C, but they are every day going and breaking through Area B and C and do whatever they like. Every day they go to Jenin area, which is part of Area A. I mean, Oslo is not there in practice, but I mean, the authority is there, and the authority is good for the Israelis and for the Americans. They want the authority to be there. And as I said, the authority is corrupt, and many Palestinians believe this. And to believe it or not, I think they will be having a third intifada soon. People will say no soon, will go to the streets because they can't take anymore. What's going on in Jerusalem is awful. You can't imagine. For the first time in history, I mean, the Israelis attack funerals of martyrs. I mean, they killed without any reason. They just killed because people are just shouting, because people are holding the Palestinian flag. And the Palestinian flag, according to Oslo, is not illegal. I mean, people can have it. I mean, they are doing things that were not expected by them. So the authority is corrupt, as I told you. The economic situation is very bad. People are losing hope for any political settlement. I think people will go to the street to do another uprising. And this uprising will be again against the Israelis and against the authority, as far as I think. I don't know, because people are fed up with the situation.
And one area that has never been adequately addressed is the right of refugees. And that's an area that the Joint Advocacy Initiative through the YW and the YMCAs have been strongly engaged in supporting their rights, and is an area that the United Church of Christ and the Christian Church Disciples of Christ also are engaged deeply through our partnerships. We want to thank you, Nidal, for your time today and for the opportunity we've had to hear from you, to learn about the reality on the ground, and to learn about ways that Palestinians, including our partners, are resisting the reality of apartheid, and ways that we can engage with them. We are grateful for your witness and your ministry, and appreciate your time with us today. We're also grateful to our audience for your participation today. There will be continuing events the rest of this week in our special advocacy focus. And one action that people can take is the Third Thursday alert, which has been posted on our website and is available in the chat. And that focuses on calling for an unbiased investigation into the circumstances surrounding the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, the Palestinian American journalist who was killed last week. So thank you very much, Nidal, and I want to turn it back over to Becca to wrap us up.
Yes, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Peter. Thank you, Nidal. Thank you for everyone who's joined us. I just want to invite you all to join us in 2 weeks for our next Wednesday with the World webinar. It's a World Refugee Day ecumenical worship service with partners from the Presbyterian Church USA, the Disciples, the UCC, and the Mennonite Central Committee. So I've put the link to register in the chat, and we invite you to join us on Wednesday, June 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern. And then Global Ministries in the month of August is doing a virtual 5K to focusing on climate justice. And we will be highlighting the olive tree planting program that Nidal has talked about as part of that. So we encourage you all to join us in August doing a virtual 5K.
Thank you all. It was good to be with you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much.
Siblings in Christ, if this conversation has moved you, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help programs like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed as you continue your day. Know that you are not alone, and we are holding you in prayer. Amen.